Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this month's Meet the Experts IFRS17 live event. I'm joined today again by Mark Miller, our Legerity Global IFRS17 lead, to answer your question here live. Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, very well. Nice sunny day.
Yeah, definitely sunny day. Spring is coming. Before we start, I just want to share with you great news. This month, Legerity was awarded IFRS17 Solution of the Year by Insurance ERM. And this is really a rigorous selection process by independent team of industry experts. So we are really proud to have been recognized by the industry as the best solution to tackle your IFRS17 transformation. Today's event aims to help you and your firm on your journey toward IFRS 17 compliance. And we really want to spend this time to answer your questions that we received before the webinars or here live during this event. As a reminder, you can ask them either via email on info@legerityfinancials.com, or you can drop a comment in LinkedIn Live event and we pick them up during the session. So let's start. Our first question is about how does Legerity handle implementation for insurers who do not have an internal actuaries or actuarial models and rely on external expert and advisories?
Interesting question. So, I suppose for the smaller insurers, that could well be the case that the actuarial function isn't as mature in terms of personnel and maybe applications as well. But what I would say is that, IFRS 17 is heavily dependent on actuarial input. So, the CSM is measured on the fulfillment cash flows, which largely the actuaries will be responsible for producing. So some sort of process does need to be in place, and that needs to be as automated as possible. I think with IFRS 17, you can't afford to rely on spreadsheets. I think with regard to external experts advisory companies, that's a model we do see, sort of shared service centers, some of the big firms and smaller consultancies offering an outsourced actuarial function. And certainly in FastPost, we're very well used to dealing with these kind of organizations, and we can specify clear data requirements and inputs from them, and they're usually very happy to adapt their processes around IFRS 17. I think in regard to companies that don't have actuarial models and maybe limited resources, then FastPost, we're not a modeling application, and you do need that expert input from actuaries, but we can support the process in maybe automating some of the mechanical calculations around cash flows and risk adjustment. So I mean, I have to caution that, actuaries are a key part of the process, and actuarial figures, cash flows, risk margins, these need to be produced. You can't get around that. But certainly we're very happy working with advisors, and we can provide some support to help insurers build an automated process.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, that's a real technology type of question that needs to be considered and have the flexibility to adapt. So the next question is from our last webinars, when somebody asked, we have a multiple entity organization with each entity adopting slightly different accounting principle from group accounting policies. Should we be looking to scale up our accounting and reporting team to deal with this change and requirement for new disclosure? Do you have any advice on what others are doing in terms of those requirements?
I suppose in a multi-entity group, this kind of thing can happen. So different entities sit in different jurisdictions, so there may be different regimes in place. And then also, the perspective of a group is not the same as the perspective as a smaller entity. So materiality can be different. And, in a federated sort of company, there may well be, characters involved who want to make different choices. And I think that's fine. And yeah, we absolutely see that. So things like the CSM balance, what that looks like from an entity perspective could be different from a group perspective where the materiality is different. Or maybe on something like, amortization of acquisition costs, again, the time periods might be different. So it's absolutely the case that you see different calculation requirements at group from local entity level. And so therefore the consolidation process is a bit more complex, because you need to obviously take into account the group view from the consolidated numbers, but entities still need their local entity view. So that's where a multi-ledger system really comes into its own, because you can provide the local entities with their own instance or their own entity dimension within the ledger, and then you can create group entities. I mean, particular entities, or perhaps just sort of fictional entities that become consolidation units, and in those entities you can perform the different accounting rules. So with a subledger supported by accounting rules engine, you can define different accounting rules supported by different calculations, depending on if you're dealing with the underlying entity or the group entity. So the subledger and accounting rules definitely helps you manage the results, if you like, and supports the consolidation process through the multi-entity structures and the ability to hold results prepared on different bases. But I think at the same token, you want to be efficient in processing. So another key advantage that you should look for in your solution is you want to present data once. So for example, you can present your acquisition costs, and then you can calculate them in the local entity on one basis, and then in the group entity on another basis, but of course only provide the data once. So I think that's a key consideration when you're looking at these multi-entity views that are in effect leveraging the same or similar data to set it up so you only send the data to the system once and let the system handle the directing of results into the different entities according to the different counting rules and different calculation rules.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, multi-entities, it seems to be a key challenge for large insurers. It's a question that is coming very often during our discussion, how to handle that. If we get to the next question, okay, so just a reminder for everyone before I get to the next question. If you have any direct question that you want to ask here live, just write it in the comment section and we will pick it up as we go. So our third question, which was emailed to us a few days ago, it's, we found that one of our stumbling blocks in making real progress in our IFRS17 program is the interpretation of standard across our Big Four advisory partner, our data and system team, and our group accounting policy. How have you gone about your interpretation of the standard in designing the solution? Sorry for the wrong reading.
No, I think, yeah, no, I mean, I fully understand the question. I suppose, the advisory firms are very familiar with IFRS 17 at a very deep technical level, but actuaries and finance teams don't always speak the same language, come at things from a different perspective, and maybe people sitting in data and IT aren't accounting or actuarial experts at all. So, some of the terminology doesn't mean so much. But at the end of the day, we do have to align this across the organisation to get the project successful. And I think this is about different levels of understanding and language, and being conscious of that in the project, and making an effort in the way you approach things to resolve this. And I think it's not something you can afford to leave till later in the project. It has to be addressed up front, because accounting policy has a big impact on design decisions. And so if you get your design wrong at the start, or don't cover off things in full, then that can cause problems later on, where you have to undo and redo things. And I think that's one of the advantages, a big advantage of pre-configured solutions. So you're not, in an enterprise class implementation, you effectively say to the client, what do you want to do? But that is therefore a much more lengthy process. But with a pre-configured solution, you come with a ready interpretation of the standard that's been tested by other insurers and other auditors and other advisory firms. So it already works. And that's a point to align to. That's a framework that it gives you during implementation. And it can help with education. So, the discussion around how the tool is working and what configuration settings is, in part, then helps educate across the organization, about IFRS 17 as well. So you can bring people along in that way. It also helps, getting agreement with the auditors. So the auditors will be much more comfortable, I think, using solutions that have been tested with others. But it also highlights, accounting policy choices that you might need to make along the way that are significant for auditors. And there's a lot of grey areas in IFRS 17 and a lot of room for judgment. And, insurers, particularly at this stage, should be looking to simplify their solutions and not making them over complex. And that can mean sometimes making compromises in the accounting policy that definitely need confirmation from the auditors before you go off and design and implement it. So the pre-configured solution really provides that framework of education and the highlighting of key design accounting policy related decisions that need to be cleared with the auditors. And having said that, it's almost impossible, I think, to imagine that you're going to have everything decided. So certainly the solution needs to include some flexibility to adapt. So in certain areas, some of the policy choices would need to be recognized as dynamic and could change in the future. And so therefore you need to embed in the solution the ability to change your mind before go live or potentially afterwards.
Yeah. And what would be the best way to have this flexibility to be able to change your mind and take in consideration those changes in accounting policies?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, it's the quality of the solution. So, if you have a very fixed, rigid, hard-coded solution, then you're stuck with it. But by having a solution that's a sort of tried and tested platform with dynamic configuration, then that makes that flexibility much more easy to manage, because you don't have to ask developers to go back and do recoding. You're managing configuration settings that they of course need to be heavily auditable and controlled with lineage of any changes and things like that. But you need an application that allows users to change things where is needed.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so our next question here, we received it from Atenas. It's, what cost can be classified as acquisition cost under IFRS 17? Do we include costs such as sales analytics team and salary costs, quality assurance, etc.? Do we include costs that directly release to the employee agent to sell the product?
Right, well, that's quite a detailed question. So, I think Certainly, the definition of what costs to include and what is an acquisition cost and what is not an acquisition cost, the standard is not providing that much guidance on that. So the standard is really saying, we need to. You need to apply your local judgment on this. And I think this is something that's prevalent in IFRS 17 a lot, that it's prescriptive around some of the rules, but in many cases it's asking insurers to apply their own judgment and justify that with their auditors and advisors. So I wouldn't want to comment on detailed acquisition cost definition subject, but this is a part of the project that when you come to implement, if you haven't got clear, it's going to severely delay your project. So from a data perspective, if the data team is saying we need to supply the solution with our acquisition costs, then you need to know what they are in respect of your organization, and have that be confident that you can to communicate to your auditors your judgment, and that will meet their requirements. So I think I'm not going to offer a detailed definition, I'm afraid, but what I am going to say is, make sure that those definitions are clear early on in the project so you can get on with the data integration work.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, sometimes we get some pretty tough questions. Here it's a little bit a very direct, straightforward question, but it can be broad. How do you calculate the CSM?
I suppose, well, if I was to guess, that might have been written by an actuary, because actuaries are all about modelling and calculation. So it's natural you see CSM. How do we calculate it? But I'd say CSM is not going to formula like x plus y 2 squared equals AB or anything like that. The CSM is a balance, and the IFRS 17 is an accounting standard. So I think we need to consider the CSM in that regard. So it's not so much how do you calculate it. If you were to answer that question, you could say, okay, it's based on the fulfillment cash flow. So there's a risk adjusted, discounted cash flows from the policy that are grouped into the IFRS 17 group. So you could sort of start with that, but that only gives the initial recognition of the CSM. The CSM is then a balance that evolves over time, and there are many things that can adjust the CSM over its life. So obviously you accrete interest, you have to release for coverage, you have changes in assumptions, but then you also have experience things that can adjust the CSM also. So when we say how do you calculate the CSM, I would answer that we need to think of it as a balance, and it has movements or transactions that then support those balances. And then we can look at the individual transactions. So for example, adding new contracts or accreting interest, we can consider those to be individual transactions within the CSM. And then we can look to how do we calculate those. And some of them will be actuarial in nature, like for example the measurement of changes in future cash flows. Others will be more transactional, say like premium experience adjustments, or calculations, say like interest on the CSM, which is more sort of mechanical calculation. So I think that's how we look at it. We see the CSM as a balance supported by transactions, and you want a system that gives users the transparency to see how the balance is evolving across many dimensions. So across all those transaction types and all the granularity that supports them, and then obviously performs the calculations in an automated way, but at the same time gives users visibility of how the individual transactions are supported by data and calculation. So that would be my answer. And maybe just to finish, of course, you've got foreign currency effects. And then when you say the CSM, there are in fact many CSMs for a big company, and you want to slice and dice across those dimensions as well.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, it brings me to the next question. That's a little bit more from my side. How do you calculate the risk adjustment?
A very similar point, I suppose, but maybe the risk adjustment, we could argue, is a little bit more actuarial in nature. So it's certainly a balance like the CSM. It needs to sit in your financials. It's part of the disclosures. But if at the simplest level, if you want, you can manage your risk adjustment balance with a one-line movement. So you in that sense, the risk adjustment is much more supported via actuarial calculations, because you need to look at how you're going to measure the risk adjustment, and that is definitely, I've seen a lot of actuarial papers on deep technical thoughts on how you can go from a cash flow view to assessing and valuing the amount of risk. But having said that, there is the disaggregation option to look at, posting the what would be the deemed effects of finance on the risk adjustment in the finance section of the P&L, and you can certainly break down the risk adjustment into a lot of different categories of movement. So for just like the CSM, adding new contracts, impact of changes in assumptions, or release of risk for expiration of risk. So there becomes a view of the risk adjustment that's again much more transactional, supporting a balance. So I think in nature the risk adjustment is a bit more actuarial. And I would defer to the actuaries on the methodologies to produce the risk adjustment. But by the same token, you need all the functionalities of the finance view, a sub-ledger view, where it's a balance with individual transactions supporting the movement of it from period to period.
Wonderful. Amazing. Thank you very much. So our last question, actually, this is a question that we addressed in our last webinar. What are the specific concerns that should be considered in our accounting for reinsurance contract held? So as we reach the end of the live event, I think I would direct you to our webinars where we really cover this topic extensively. You can access it on our website. We spent an hour discussing about reinsurance. And this will really bring us to an end for today's Meet the Expert session. Mark, I just want to say a big thank you for all your insights.
Good questions as usual. Thank you very much.
No problems. Thank you to all the audience for the questions. Now, to finish, just a quick word about Legerity. As many of you know, at Legerity, we built a solution to address your IFRS17 requirement under 3 principles: an enterprise-grade functionalities, out-of-the-box configuration, and fast-track implementation. We really believe that tackling IFRS17 in the right way will help you streamline and de-risk your project while delivering transformational benefits that will go far beyond IFRS17. If you're interested in hearing more about Legerity, you can send us an email at info@legerityfinancials.com, or you can go on our website and request a meeting with one of our IFRS17 experts. I also invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to receive notification for future live events, but also webinars and any other IFRS-related material. Thank you very much and have a very good rest of the week. Goodbye.
Bye.
IFRS 17 is complicated and brings a big change in global accounting standards. As an insurer, you will have lots of vendors trying to get your attention. Our approach at Legerity is different. It's based on decades of experience in accounting rule software and delivering IFRS 17 projects for some of the world's leading firms. Fast Post Express does exactly what it says. It's everything you need to be IFRS 17 compliant, quickly, with no fuss, and will set you up for the future, whatever that might bring. Other solutions can be heavy, complicated, and often designed for other purposes, even other industries. All the stuff that just weighs you down. Some are positioned as light, but are full of empty promises. In fact, you actually end up spending more time, money, and effort than you were led to believe. And if you're tempted to solve in-house, you will find out the hard way that IFRS 17 isn't a problem you can tackle with spreadsheets. So why compromise? With Legerity's Fast Post Express, you get an enterprise-grade IFRS 17 solution, pre-configured and SaaS delivered from a team with a track record of success. You benefit from a reduced implementation time, complexity, and expense, giving you regulatory peace of mind and a clear path beyond compliance. Insurance is about managing risk. Choosing your IFRS 17 solution shouldn't be one of them. Legerity. It's our business to take care of yours.